One of the reasons that I hear from people all the time when I say to them, hey, Daniel Havercost does not use a credit card for personal finances. And people say, well, you need to use a credit card because you need to build up your credit and you need to improve your score. And really one of the best ways to do that is by using a credit card and paying that balance off every month. And I would say to you, that's right. That's true. I've got enough different components where I've borrowed money for mortgages and things like that, and I'm paying those back on a systematic basis, and I'm very closely watching my credit score. But I want to make sure that everybody that's on the webinar today understands the full scope of how you get your FICO number and how you come about your credit score. And again, we can go into probably an entire another presentation on this, but I want to keep this fairly short and sweet. And I really want to focus on the 2 of the 5 different components that make up your FICO score. So as you see on the left side of the screen here, the payment history and your amounts owed make up 65% of your FICO score. So I'm going to just focus on those 2. Again, there's a lot of other nuances that come with the other 3 that are listed on the right side. I think the first one seems pretty straightforward. Again, more than a third of your FICO score is based upon your payment history. So as long as you are paying off and making your payments on time, then 35% of your score will reflect that. So if I have a credit card that I've got a payment and I make that payment every single month on or before the due date, then my score is going to positively reflect that. If I make my mortgage payment on time, if I make my car payment on time, if I borrowed any other money from institutions that are feeding back into my FICO score and reporting to the 3 major bureaus, then my score is going to reflect that. If I'm a day late, then that's going to fall into 1 to 30 days late. And so again, my score will get dinged based upon the number of times I am late between 1 and 30 days. The next category is going to be 31 to 60 days. And obviously my score is going to be even more negatively affected if I'm making payments or I'm late on payments to that extent. And then the final kind of tier would be if I'm between 61 and 90 days, and then if I'm over 90 days. So again, obviously you can imagine that the further out I go, the later I am on payments, the more my score is going to suffer. I'll tell you on a personal note, when I was in college, there was a t-shirt that I saw as I was walking through kind of the Commons area that was one of the coolest t-shirts I've ever seen. And I had to have that t-shirt. And that t-shirt was free as long as I signed up for a credit card with, and it happened to be Discover is who I used at the time. And so I did that, and I put a couple payments on the credit card when I was in college, and I paid them off. And it wasn't until a couple years later when I was going to buy a house, and the mortgage company that I was using pulled up my credit score, and they said, hey, you've got this one payment that's more than 90 days late. What's the deal there? And I said, I don't even know what that is. And we looked at it, and I ended up calling Discover, and they said, oh, yeah, by the way, you closed the card down, but there was like a little bit of interest that carried over, and so you owed like $6.31 from years and years ago, and over time that had multiplied, and it was now like $9.72 that I owed, but it had been years and years, and that remaining on my credit score affected my score by about 50 points. So I then paid it off, and I got Discover to remove it from my credit report. And so again, some of these very tiny little things that are on our credit reports, we got to make sure we're aware of those, specifically as they relate to the biggest component of our score, which is our payment history, and it makes up 35% of our FICO score. And again, I would encourage you that you see the bottom of the screen there, it references annualcreditreport.com. There's a bunch of these out there. You can go and on an annual basis get your score and make sure that there's nothing on your credit report that is inaccurate or incorrect, and you get that cleaned up so that your score is as positive as it can be. Because obviously when you go to borrow money from anybody, any institution, they're going to look at your FICO score. They're going to look at your credit report, and they're going to want to see what kind of a repayer are you? Are you a qualified buyer? And if you are a qualified buyer and you've got a high enough score, then the interest they're going to charge you and the terms that they're going to give you are going to be dependent upon partly your score. So again, this is a critical component of our overall financial well-being. I think that one's pretty straightforward though, and I think hopefully we're all doing that to some degree on our payment history. We're keeping a close eye on that. But the second one that makes up 30% of our score is the amounts owed. And this is one that I think really does require a little bit of clarification, because there's a couple of unknowns here, or parts that are not as well described or articulated by the credit card industries specifically, that I think we really need to know a little bit better. And so let me walk you through this. What this is referencing is, how much credit do you have available? How much money, and a lot of this obviously relates to credit cards, but let's just use an example here. I have a credit card with $10,000 as my limit, my available credit. And depending on how much of that card I use is going to reflect back into the amounts that I owe. Now, obviously, if I've got student loan debt and I've got a mortgage and I've got a car loan, that all is going to fall under the amounts that I owe. But it's also looking at how much do I have available to me that I could utilize, and how much of that amount am I using? So again, in that case, if I have a $10,000 credit card limit, and let's just say I'm using, $3,000 of that, and I'm running a balance of $3,000 every month, and I'm paying that down over time, well, then obviously that's going to reflect that I'm using 30% of the credit that's available to me on that card. Okay? And so if we use it in, as we talked about on the credit cards in the slide before, if I use the credit card and I put $3,000 worth of purchases on it, and then I pay that off at the end of each month, we're probably thinking to ourselves, I am sticking it back to the credit card companies, and I'm not paying them any interest, so there's really no harm and no foul there. But this is the misnomer, and this is the part that needs a little clarification when it comes to determining your FICO number. And that is, there are 3 major bureaus that give you a score, that come up with your credit score. And each one of those bureaus are evaluating your situation at a different time throughout the month. And the same thing applies as you think about, if you have more than one credit card, most likely your credit or your amount due is not always due on the first day of the month, right? It might be due on the 15th of the month, the 21st of the month. It's all over the place. And if you've got more than 2 cards, you'll notice that the due date on those cards might vary tremendously throughout the month. Well, the reality is, on the bureau side, looking at those 3 bureaus, they're evaluating the amounts you owe, what you have outstanding, at a different time throughout the month. So if I am using, if I've charged up $3,000 out of an available $10,000 limit, the reality is, even though I'm paying that off every single month and I'm never running any interest or carrying any ongoing debt with that credit card, I am, in terms of probably 2, if not all 3 of those bureaus. Because when they take their snapshot at whatever point in the month, they're seeing that I'm utilizing $3,000 out of the available $10,000 to me. So I'm a 30% user of my available credit. And again, that 30% that you see on the screen here in relation to the amount that makes up your FICO number also equates to the kind of the level that you should keep that available credit at, and the utilization of that credit at. And so what I mean by that is, if I've got $10,000 available to me, I really shouldn't be using more than 30% of that available amount. Because if I use more than that, and if the credit bureau, again, whenever they look at me in the month, if I've used more than that, if I've charged up $8,000 in the month, even if I pay it back at the end of the month and I carry no balance, they're looking at me as an 80% user available credit. So again, we got to keep that in mind when it comes to that amounts owed and how that part of our credit score is determined. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you've got some additional questions or want to do a little more research there, I would really point you back to Annual Credit Report. They're going to dig you into how exactly they come up with, the credit bureaus come up with the score, and how you can improve your score overall. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving forward here, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of depth that goes into understanding and most effectively utilizing available credit to you, and understanding all the ins and outs of the downside of paying too much in interest, and the result of maybe a score on your credit report that is not quite as high as you would like it to be.